In the grim darkness of the far future, there are few sights more terrifying than a space marine dreadnought striding across the battlefield. These towering war machines represent the pinnacle of the Imperium's military technology, walking fortresses that combine the fury of a tank with the tactical awareness of a veteran warrior. But what happens when one of these revered machines falls into the hands of the Imperium's most unpredictable and numerous enemy? What becomes of a dreadnought when Orks capture it mid-battle? To understand this horrifying scenario, we must first understand the fundamental nature of both the prize and those who claim it. This is not a story of simple destruction or quick salvage. This is a tale of technological desecration, cultural collision, and the ultimate degradation of one of the Imperium's most honored warriors. When an Ork warband manages to capture a dreadnought, they don't just acquire a piece of military hardware. They gain a trophy that will be fought over, torn apart, rebuilt, and paraded as a testament to their superiority over the Imperium's finest. The capture of a dreadnought by Orks is vanishingly rare, but when it occurs, it represents one of the darkest moments imaginable for any Space Marine chapter. These are not just machines. They are living tombs, sacred reliquaries containing the remains of heroes who have served for centuries or even millennia. Each dreadnought houses a mortally wounded Space Marine, a warrior so valued that his chapter refused to let him die, instead preserving his consciousness within a cybernetic sarcophagus and binding him to an armored walker bristling with devastating weaponry. The thought of such a revered elder falling into Xenos' hands fills every battle brother with a fury that borders on madness. But to the Orks, none of this matters. They care nothing for the sanctity of the machine or the honor of its occupant. To them, a captured dreadnought represents the ultimate prize, proof of their martial prowess, and a treasure trove of valuable technology to be stripped, looted, and repurposed. It's the difference between two entirely incompatible worldviews colliding in the most violent way imaginable. The Orks are the most successful and widespread species in the galaxy, and their success stems not from careful planning or sophisticated strategy, but from their fundamental nature. They are living weapons, creatures genetically engineered during the ancient war in heaven to be the perfect soldiers. But their creators, the mysterious Old Ones, are long gone, leaving the Orks to rampage across the galaxy with no higher purpose than their own satisfaction. At the core of Orkish psychology is a simple, primal drive toward violence. Orks don't just enjoy fighting, they need it. Violence sustains them in ways that transcend mere preference or cultural tradition. An Ork, deprived of conflict, will literally begin to weaken and waste away, their muscles atrophying and their legendary toughness fading. They require warfare the way humans require food and water. This isn't metaphorical or exaggerated. Violence is a biological necessity for the greenskins. This need manifests in every aspect of Ork society. They fight constantly, whether against other species or amongst themselves. A typical Ork settlement is a cacophony of brawls, contests, and general mayhem. The strongest rise to the top through sheer physical dominance, and the social order is maintained through casual violence that would horrify more civilized species. Yet to the Orks, this is not chaos. This is order. The biggest, toughest Ork leads because he's earned it through his fists, and everyone else falls in line until they think they can challenge him. What makes Orks particularly dangerous is their psychic field, known as the WAG. This Gestalt psychic energy field grows stronger with the number of Orks gathered together, subtly warping reality to match Orkish expectations. If enough Orks believe something will work, it often does, at least to some degree. This is why Ork technology functions despite often appearing to be little more than scrap metal held together with wishes and violence. The machines work because the Orks believe they will, and the WAG field makes that belief reality. This psychic phenomenon also governs Orc social hierarchy. They instinctively recognize who is bigger and therefore in charge. Size matters tremendously in Orc society because it's a visible manifestation of success. Orcs grow throughout their entire lives, and those who survive longer through victory after victory become physically larger. The biggest Orcs, the war bosses, can reach truly enormous proportions, standing taller than even space marines and possessing strength that allows them to tear ceramite armor with their bare hands. But violence and size aren't the only aspects of Orc culture. They're also inveterate looters, scavengers who see battlefield salvage as one of the great rewards of warfare. After every engagement, Orc mobs descend upon the dead and dying, stripping anything of value or interest. Weapons, armor, teeth for currency, interesting bits of technology, trophies to prove their prowess. Everything gets taken. This isn't mere greed. It's a fundamental part of how Orcs view the world. The spoils of victory belong to the victors, and the Orcs are determined to be victorious. Different Orc clans approach looting with varying degrees of enthusiasm. The Death Skulls have elevated scavenging to an art form, painting themselves blue for luck and maintaining the superstitious belief that anything they steal becomes their rightful property through the act of theft itself. They're not ashamed of being thieves. They're proud of it. To a Death Skull, the ability to nick something valuable from under another's nose demonstrates superior cunning and deserves celebration. This brings us to the Mech Boys, the Orc engineering cast who will play a central role in any captured Dreadnought's fate. Mech Boys aren't trained engineers in any conventional sense. Their knowledge is genetic, hard-coded into their DNA by the Old Ones countless millennia ago. As a Mech Boy grows, mechanical knowledge simply emerges in their consciousness. They instinctively understand how things work, how to build engines, how to wire weapons, how to create the ramshackle vehicles and weapons that make Orc warbands so dangerous. Mech Boys approach technology in a way that would drive Adeptus Mechanicus tech priests to apoplectic fury. They have no respect for machine spirits, no understanding of proper maintenance rituals, no patience for careful procedure. They bash things together until they work, or until they explode. Both outcomes are considered acceptable results. A Mech Boy presented with a piece of sophisticated Imperial technology doesn't see sacred engineering to be preserved. He sees interesting bits to be yanked out and repurposed, combined with Orc ingenuity to create something suitably Orky. Their workshop philosophy could be summarized as enthusiastic tinkering, backed by genetic knowledge and powered by the WEG field. A Mech Boy might strip down an Imperial tank, remove half its components because they're too complicated, replace them with scrap metal and hope, then somehow create something that functions. It shouldn't work. By all laws of physics and engineering, it should be an inert pile of junk. But because the Mech Boy believes it will work, and because the WAG field supports that belief, it rumbles to life and performs admirably, at least until it inevitably explodes. Mech Boys are also naturally curious, in their own violent, destructive way. Presented with a complex machine, they want to know how it works. This investigation takes the form of enthusiastic dismantling, usually with the aid of large spanners, cutting torches, and explosive charges when subtlety fails. The concept of careful examination doesn't really exist in the Mech Boy vocabulary. They learn by taking things apart, and they take things apart with all the delicacy of a wrecking ball. With this understanding of Orc psychology and culture established, we can begin to comprehend what happens when they encounter one of the Imperium's most sacred war machines. A Space Marine Dreadnought is far more than a weapon system. It represents one of the most profound sacrifices a warrior can make, and one of the highest honors a chapter can bestow. When a Space Marine suffers wounds so catastrophic that even their enhanced physiology and the skills of apothecaries cannot save them, the chapter faces a choice. They can let their brother die with honor, or they can inter him within a dreadnought sarcophagus, preserving his consciousness and tactical experience for future battles. The process of internment is both medical procedure and sacred ritual. The dying Marine's broken body is placed within a life support sarcophagus, a cybernetic tomb designed to keep his remaining organic systems functioning indefinitely. Often, there's little left. A torso, perhaps part of a head, fragments of nervous system. The rest of the body has been destroyed by whatever catastrophic injury led to this fate. What remains is wired directly into the Dreadnought systems through a mind impulse unit, a neural link that allows the Marine to control the walker as if it were his own body. But this honor comes at a terrible price. The Marine can never leave the sarcophagus. He is permanently entombed within the machine, unable to touch, to taste, to feel in any normal sense. His sensory input comes through mechanical sensors. His voice is a synthesized approximation of his former speech. He experiences the world through targeting displays, Auspex readouts, and pressure sensors. Where once he felt the weight of his bolter and the recoil of each shot, now he feels nothing but data streams translated into something his brain can process. The psychological toll is immense. Between battles, dreadnoughts are placed in stasis sleep, a sort of death-like hibernation that can last for decades or even centuries. Each awakening brings disorientation, as the pilot struggles to remember where and when he is. Many ancient dreadnoughts have memories spanning millennia, yet those memories become increasingly fragmented and distant with each sleep cycle. The pilot's sense of self slowly erodes, ground away by centuries of half-life existence. Some pilots handle this better than others. The most venerable dreadnoughts maintain their faculties through sheer force of will, becoming walking repositories of chapter history and tactical wisdom. They serve as advisors and spiritual anchors for younger Marines, their counsel sought out by chapter masters and captains. Their very presence on the battlefield inspires others to greater acts of heroism. Others fare less well. Some dreadnoughts go mad from isolation and the slow degradation of their organic components. They become feral, attacking anything in their path regardless of allegiance. These unfortunate souls are usually kept in reinforced chambers, awakened only for the direst emergencies and pointed at the enemy like guided missiles. The Space Wolves have a particularly famous example in Murderfang, a dreadnought so consumed by rage that he must be restrained with heavy chains between battles. But regardless of the pilot's mental state, every dreadnought is a formidable weapon. The walker's frame is constructed from ceramite and adamantium, the same materials that make up Space Marine power armor, but in far greater quantities and thicker plates. Dreadnoughts can wade through fire that would melt lesser vehicles, their armor ablative enough to shrug off direct hits from weapons that would obliterate infantry. Their armament varies based on their tactical role, but all dreadnoughts are terrifyingly well armed, a standard castroferrum pattern. Dreadnought typically mounts a long-range weapon like an assault cannon or twin-linked lascannons on one arm, capable of shredding enemy armor or infantry at distance. The other arm terminates in a dreadnought close combat weapon, essentially a massive power fist that can crush tanks and pulverize fortifications. Many models also mount additional weapons like storm bolters or heavy flamers to deal with lighter targets. More specialized variants exist for specific roles. Ironclad dreadnoughts sacrifice speed for even heavier armor and specialized close combat weapons like seismic hammers that can reduce walls to rubble. Venerable dreadnoughts house the oldest, most experienced pilots and feature enhanced armor and superior targeting systems. Contemptor pattern. Dreadnoughts, dating back to the Horus Heresy, represent lost technology with superior mobility and atomantic shielding. The newer Redemptor pattern, designed for Primaris Marines, trades longevity for raw power, burning out its pilot faster but delivering incredible firepower. In battle, a dreadnought serves multiple roles simultaneously. It provides heavy fire support, laying down devastating barrages to suppress enemy positions. It acts as a mobile fortress, providing cover for advancing infantry. It serves as a spearhead for assaults, smashing through enemy lines with overwhelming force. And perhaps most importantly, it serves as a symbol of the chapter's history and honor, a physical manifestation of their eternal nature. Battle brothers fight harder in the presence of a dreadnought, knowing that one of their ancient heroes watches over them. This combination of sacred status, military power, and historical significance makes dreadnoughts incredibly valuable to their chapters. Each one represents centuries of accumulated knowledge, irreplaceable technology, and the embodied spirit of a hero whose deeds are legend. Chapters maintain careful records of every dreadnought in their armory, tracking the battles they've fought, the victories they've won, the wisdom they've dispensed. When a dreadnought falls in battle, the entire chapter mourns, and they will move heaven and earth to recover the sarcophagus and return it to the chapter's halls for proper funeral rites. Now imagine one of these priceless sacred war machines in the hands of Orks. The very concept is anathema to everything the Adeptus Astartes stands for. It represents not just a military loss, but a spiritual desecration. And yet, under the right circumstances, it can happen. The capture of a dreadnought typically occurs during moments of absolute chaos, when the fog of war is at its thickest and the unexpected becomes possible. Dreadnoughts are formidable, yes, but they're not invincible. Their heavy armor can be breached by concentrated fire or specialized anti-armor weapons. Their powerful limbs can be severed by precision strikes or overwhelming force. And most critically, they can be swarmed, dragged down by sheer weight of numbers that even their devastating weaponry cannot hope to stem. Picture the scene. A space marine company deploys to repel an orc wag that has descended upon an imperial world. The greenskins number in the hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, a green tide that crashes against imperial defenses like waves against a seawall. The space marines fight with their characteristic precision and ferocity, each warrior worth 100 ordinary soldiers. But the orcs keep coming and coming and coming, seemingly without end. A venerable dreadnought, ancient Calderon of the Ultramarines, strides into the fray. He has fought for 7 centuries, his sarcophagus housing one of the chapter's most honored warriors. His assault cannon screams, each burst cutting down dozens of orc boys. His power fist crushes anything foolish enough to get close. Around him, tactical squads advance, using the dreadnought as mobile cover and a rallying point. For a time, the line holds, but war is unpredictable, especially against orcs. A massive explosion tears through nearby Imperial lines. Perhaps it's an orc artillery shell, perhaps a suicide bomb squig, perhaps just bad luck. Whatever the cause, it creates a gap in the defensive formation. Orcs, ever opportunistic, pour through the breach. Ancient Calderon's supporting squads are forced to respond to this new threat, moving to plug the gap and prevent encirclement. For just a moment, the dreadnought is isolated. That moment is all the orcs need. A war boss, recognizing the opportunity, bellows a command. The tone of the wag shifts. Instead of a general assault, the greenskins suddenly coordinate, focusing on the lone walker. Tank busters appear, their rockets screaming through the air. The dreadnought's armor holds, but each impact staggers it, disrupts its targeting, creates momentary vulnerabilities. Then the knobs arrive. These are the orc elite, each one as large as a space marine and considerably more aggressive. They carry power claws, massive hydraulic weapons that can tear through ceramite given enough force. The knobs rush the dreadnought, heedless of the casualties inflicted by its weapons. For every knob that falls, 2 more reach melee range. Power claws tear at armor plating. Rockets impact at point-blank range, seeking weak points in joints and seals. Inside his sarcophagus, ancient Calderon fights with the fury of centuries, but he's overwhelmed. His assault cannon jams from sustained fire, its barrel glowing red. His power fist crushes orcs, but there are always more. A lucky shot from a rocket launcher finds the joint connecting his left arm, and the limb tears away in a shower of sparks and hydraulic fluid. Another explosion rocks his chassis, and he staggers. The orcs sense weakness like sharks scenting blood. More of them pile on, climbing over each other in their eagerness to be part of bringing down this mighty foe. Weight of numbers begins to tell. The Dreadnought crashes to one knee, its servos screaming, in protest. Calderon tries to rise, but massive chains wielded by mech boys wrap around his remaining limbs. Dozens, then hundreds of orcs grab the chains, their collective strength overwhelming even the Dreadnought's power. Ancient Calderon goes down, crashing into the mud and debris of the battlefield. Orcs swarm over him immediately, like ants covering a fallen titan. They pound on his armor with hammers, shoot at close range, searching for any way to breach the hull or disable his remaining systems. Calderon fights still, his remaining weapons firing until the end, crushing orcs beneath him, even as he falls. But it's too late. The walker is down, its mobility compromised, its offensive capabilities degraded. And the orcs are very good at disabling dangerous things once they have them pinned. From Calderon's perspective, the experience is a nightmare made real. His sensory input goes haywire as systems are damaged or destroyed. His control over the walker's limbs becomes sporadic, then fails entirely. He can feel the orcs crawling over his chassis like insects, can hear their crude weapons battering at his armor, can sense his systems shutting down one by one as connections are severed and power lines cut. He tries to activate emergency protocols, to trigger self-destruct mechanisms that would deny the orcs their prize. But the greenskins, whether through luck or crude instinct, have damaged the right systems to prevent this. His communications are down. He cannot call for aid, cannot warn his battle brothers of what's happening. He is alone, trapped in a tomb that has become a prison, falling into enemy hands. The last thing he perceives before force shutdown is the howling triumph of the orcs, a sound that drowns out everything else. Then darkness, not the controlled stasis of proper sleep, but a violent, sudden severing of consciousness. The great machine goes silent, and the orcs have their prize. Across the battlefield, the Ultramarines realize with horror what has occurred. They see their ancient elder disappear beneath a green tide. Watch as the orcs drag the Dreadnought away from the front lines, fighting off all attempts at recovery. A counter-assault is organized immediately, but the orcs have prepared for this. They form a defensive perimeter around their prize, every greenskin warrior suddenly unified in purpose: protect the trophy. The fighting around the fallen Dreadnought becomes some of the fiercest of the entire engagement. Space Marines push forward with desperate fury, their usual tactical discipline giving way to raw emotion. They must recover their ancient, must prevent this desecration. But the orcs fight with equal determination. They've captured something that even they recognize as incredibly valuable, and they're not giving it up. In the end, tactical necessity forces a bitter choice. The orcs are too numerous, too well positioned. To continue the assault would be to throw away more lives for an increasingly unlikely recovery. The Ultramarines are forced to withdraw, carrying their wounded and their honored dead, but leaving behind one of their most treasured elders. The loss weighs on every warrior present. They have failed one of their own, and the shame of that failure will haunt the company for decades. For the orcs, the moment of triumph is immediate and raucous. As soon as it becomes clear that the Space Marines won't be recovering their fallen walker, the greenskins explode into celebration. They've brought down one of the mighty Dreadnoughts, those walking death machines that usually cut through orc lines like a power claw through flesh. This is a victory worth celebrating, and orcs celebrate the only way they know how, with violence, noise, and enthusiastic looting. The first fights break out almost immediately. Every orc who was anywhere near the captured Dreadnought wants credit for the kill. Arguments about who landed the killing blow escalate rapidly into full brawls. Knobs who actually participated in the takedown fight off boys who were simply nearby. Accusations of cowardice or theft fly in all directions. Several orcs are stomped to death by their fellows before the war boss restores order by the simple expedient of crushing the loudest arguers. Once the immediate chaos settles, attention turns to the prize itself. The Dreadnought lies in the churned mud, a massive form of blue armor now splattered with filth and gore. To the orcs, it's the most beautiful thing they've seen in years. It's big. It's covered in weapons. It's clearly important to the enemy. And most exciting of all, it's filled with mysterious gubbins that might do all sorts of interesting things if properly looted. Mech boys push through the crowd, their mechanical intuition already tingling at the prospect of examining Imperial technology. They bark orders, shoving lesser orcs aside to get a clear look at their prize. Gretchen are kicked into service as assistants, bringing tools and cutting equipment. The mech boys circle the fallen walker like predators, examining prey, occasionally tapping armor plates or yanking on exposed cables to see what happens. The first challenge is transportation. Dreadnoughts are heavy, weighing several tons even without their full combat load. Moving one any significant distance requires either heavy machinery or a lot of muscle. The orcs, naturally, have both. Crude cranes are fashioned from scrap metal and chain. Work crews of dozens of orcs grab hold of the walker. With much shouting, cursing, and occasional violence when someone isn't pulling their weight, they haul the Dreadnought toward the orc encampment. The journey back to the camp is its own spectacle. The captured walker becomes a mobile celebration, with orcs running alongside, cheering and firing weapons into the air. Lesser greenskins clamber over the Dreadnought's surface, claiming bits of armor as trophies or trying to pry loose interesting-looking components. The mech boys continuously have to beat them off, insisting that proper examination comes first. Looting comes later. As they move, word spreads through the orc lines. They've captured a Space Marine Dreadnought. Orcs from across the battlefield begin converging on the prize, wanting to see it for themselves. The transport becomes a procession, then a parade. Some orcs bang on drums made from Imperial helmets. Others fire their weapons in celebration. The noise is tremendous, a cacophony of triumph that can be heard for miles. Eventually, they reach the orc encampment, a sprawling mess of scrap metal fortifications, smoking workshops, and chaotic organization. The Dreadnought is dragged to the largest mech workshop, where the head mech boy has cleared space for examination. This is where the real work begins, and where the true horror of the situation becomes apparent. From the mech boy's perspective, the Dreadnought is a puzzle to be solved through the application of violence and curiosity. He can see that it's an incredible piece of engineering, far more sophisticated than most orc constructions. But sophistication doesn't impress mech boys. They're interested in function, and function can usually be understood by taking things apart. The first step is removing the weapons. This proves surprisingly easy, as the mounting systems are designed for field replacement. The mech boy simply smashes a few locking mechanisms, tears out some power cables, and the assault cannon comes free. It's immediately claimed by a nearby big mech, who declares that he's going to mount it on his Def Dread. Arguments ensue, but the big mech's power claw settles the dispute decisively. The missile launcher on the Dreadnought's chassis receives similar treatment. It's cut free with a plasma cutter, examined briefly, then set aside for later modification. Several Gretchen are beaten for trying to steal it. The various sensors, targeting systems, and communication arrays are yanked out with less care. Most are damaged in the removal process, but mech boys are confident they can figure out what the interesting bits do eventually. With the weapons removed, attention turns to the armor plating. This is where things get more difficult. Dreadnought armor is thick, layered, and reinforced at critical points. It's designed to withstand anti-tank weaponry, and it's not giving way to simple hand tools. The mech boys bring out heavier equipment, plasma cutters, power tools, and eventually industrial cutting torches. They work their way around the walker, cutting through seals and removing plates. It's hot, dangerous work. One Gretchen is incinerated when a plasma cutter malfunctions. Another loses a hand when he gets too close to a power saw. The mech boys don't even pause, simply kicking the injured aside and continuing their work. Slowly, painstakingly, the Dreadnought's outer shell comes apart. As armor plates are removed, the mech boys get their first look at the internal mechanisms. They're fascinated and confused in equal measure. The level of precision engineering, the compact arrangement of systems, the redundant power distribution, it's all far more complex than anything they'd build themselves. To a mech boy, this complexity is both impressive and wasteful. Why use 10 components when one would do? Of course, one component might explode more often, but that's part of the fun. They begin yanking out systems they don't understand or don't think they need. Hydraulic lines are cut. Power cells are removed. Cooling systems are dismantled. With each removal, the Dreadnought becomes less functional, reduced from a sophisticated war machine to its component parts. The mech boys sort everything into rough categories: shoot-in bits, move-in bits, power bits, and weird bits what we'll figure out later. Finally, they reach the sarcophagus at the walker's core. This is the moment when the nature of the Dreadnought becomes clear, even to the Orks. Up until now, they might have thought it was just an unmanned vehicle or some kind of robot. But when they cut through the final layers of protection and expose the life support chamber, they discover the truth. There's something alive inside. The sarcophagus is a marvel of Imperial technology, a sealed unit designed to sustain life for centuries. It's covered in biological monitoring equipment, nutrient feeds, neural interface ports, and redundant life support systems. Through the armored viewing port, if it hasn't been damaged, the mech boys can see the occupant. What remains of a space marine reduced to a brain, spinal cord, and essential organs floating in amniotic fluid. The sight provokes different reactions from different Orks. Some are disappointed, having expected more loot or perhaps a fully intact space marine they could torture or fight. Others are fascinated by the grotesque nature of the setup. A few, those rare Orks with enough intelligence to grasp the implications, feel something approaching respect. The Space Marine has been kept alive in this diminished state, forced to fight on long past natural death. It's a kind of brutality they can appreciate, even if they don't fully understand it. The question becomes, what to do with the pilot? The sarcophagus is still sealed, still maintaining its occupant. Opening it would likely kill the Marine inside, if he's even conscious. Some Orks vote for immediate execution, seeing no point in keeping an enemy alive. Others argue for keeping him as a prisoner, maybe to trade back to the Space Marines, or just to have around as a trophy. The mech boys want to study the life support systems, which might be useful for their own projects. In many cases, the decision becomes moot through accident rather than design. The Orks are not gentle in their examination, and life support systems are delicate. A cut power line here, a damaged nutrient feed there, and the systems begin to fail. Alarms sound, though the Orks either don't recognize them or don't care. Inside the sarcophagus, if the pilot has regained any degree of consciousness, he experiences his final moments with terrible clarity. Ancient Calderon, if he's aware, knows what's happening. He can feel his life support failing, can sense the foreign presence of Xenos around him, can understand that his chapter will not recover him. For a warrior who has served for centuries, who has known glory and honor and the brotherhood of the Astartes, this is a bitter end. There's no final battle, no heroic last stand, just a slow, undignified death at the hands of creatures he spent his life fighting. Some pilots, in these final moments, choose to end it themselves if they have any control left over their systems. They'd rather die by their own decision than at Ork convenience. Others fight until the very end, struggling against their bonds, trying futilely to activate weapons that no longer exist, or call for aid through communication systems long since destroyed. A few, the oldest and most weary, accept their fate with resignation. 700 years of war is enough. Perhaps death is not an enemy, but a long-delayed friend. When the pilot finally expires, the Orks notice primarily because several monitoring systems shut down or the sarcophagus fluid begins to darken with decay. They shrug and move on. The dead Space Marine holds little interest compared to all the technology they've uncovered. The body, such as it is, might be kept as a trophy. The skull particularly would make an excellent addition to someone's armor or vehicle. But the Orks' real prize is everything else. The weapons, the armor plates, the mechanical systems, and the knowledge they've gained from tearing it all apart. The looting process can take days or even weeks, depending on how thorough the mech boys want to be. Every component is examined, tested, and sorted. The really good bits go to the most important mechs or war bosses. Lesser pieces get distributed throughout the warband based on a combination of need, fighting skill, and who can grab them quickest without getting caught. The Dreadnought's armor plating is particularly valuable. It's thick, durable, and can be bolted onto Ork vehicles or fortifications. A battle wagon might gain a Dreadnought's chestplate as additional protection. A war boss might claim a section of armor to improve his mega armor. The distinctive blue of Ultramarine's armor will likely be painted over or replaced with Ork glyphs, but the quality of the protection remains. In some cases, Orks deliberately keep the Imperial colors visible, wanting their enemies to see that they're being shot at with reclaimed Imperial technology. The weapons are similarly distributed. That assault cannon might end up mounted on a Def Dread or Killer Khan. The Power Fist could be adapted with significant modification for use by a war boss or nob. The missile launcher might become part of a looted wagon's arsenal. In each case, the mech boys will make modifications, stripping out what they consider unnecessary components and adding their own improvements. The weapons will no longer look Imperial by the time they're finished. They'll be covered in plates, spikes, and crude Ork glyphs, barely recognizable as their original form. The internal systems prove most interesting to the mech boys from a technical standpoint. The power systems, for instance, are far more efficient than typical Ork generators. With some study and adaptation, mech boys can create improved power plants for their own vehicles. The hydraulic systems, properly understood, might improve the strength of Def Dread limbs. The targeting computers, while impossibly complex, might offer insights into building better gun sights. Of course, understanding Imperial technology doesn't mean the same thing to a mech boy as it would to an Adeptus Mechanicus tech priest. The mech boy doesn't care about machine spirits, proper maintenance rituals, or preserving the sanctity of the design. He cares about what works and what makes things more killy. If that means jamming an Imperial power cell into an Ork engine with no regard for compatibility, so be it. If it works, great. If it explodes, well, that's why you stand back a bit when you flip the switch. This rough and ready approach to technology means that the knowledge gained from the Dreadnought spreads through the mech community in unpredictable ways. One mech boy might figure out how to make better armor from studying the Dreadnought's ceramite composition. Another might create a new type of power claw inspired by the Dreadnought's close combat weapon. A third might just bolt pieces of the Dreadnought onto random vehicles and call it done. All of these are considered equally valid approaches in Ork society. The sarcophagus itself presents unique possibilities. Some mech boys recognize it as a life support system and wonder if they could adapt it for their own purposes. Could an Ork be kept alive in a similar fashion if mortally wounded? The concept is intriguing, though most Orks would probably reject it in practice. Being stuck in a box forever sounds suspiciously like not getting to fight properly, which defeats the whole purpose of being alive in the first place. Still, the technology might be useful for other applications. In some rare cases, particularly creative mech boys will attempt to build their own version of a Dreadnought, using the captured machine as a template. This is how knowledge spreads through Ork technology, not through careful study and documentation, but through attempted copying with improvements. The result bears little resemblance to the original, as the mech boy strips out everything he considers too complicated and replaces it with simpler, cruder, but often more robust Ork engineering. This process of examination, looting, and repurposing can be seen as the ultimate violation of everything a Dreadnought represents. These machines are sacred to the Space Marines, venerated as honored ancestors, and treated with the utmost respect. To see one torn apart by greenskins, its components scattered across an Ork warband, its pilot's remains displayed as a trophy, it's a desecration that goes beyond simple destruction. It's the complete erasure of dignity, the reduction of honor to salvage. But there are fates potentially worse than death and dismemberment. In some exceptionally rare cases, the pilot survives the initial capture. Perhaps the Orks are unusually careful in their disassembly. Perhaps the life support systems are more robust than expected. Perhaps the mech boys realize they have a live prisoner and decide to keep him that way out of curiosity or cruelty. Whatever the reason, some pilots endure days or even weeks in Ork captivity, fully conscious, fully aware of what's being done to their sacred machine. For these unfortunate souls, the psychological torment is immense. They must lie helpless while Orks crawl over their chassis, tearing apart the walker piece by piece. They hear the crude jokes, the arguments over who gets which trophy, the casual violence of Ork society. They can do nothing but observe through whatever senses remain functional, watching their sacred duty end in mockery and degradation. Some pilots in this situation try to reason with their captors, broadcasting messages through their Vox systems, attempting to negotiate or warn of Imperial reprisal. These efforts universally fail. Orks either can't understand High Gothic or simply don't care what their prisoner is saying. The Vox speakers might get torn out mid-sentence, ending the attempt at communication with sudden silence. Others rage and threaten, promising that their battle brothers will come, that the Orks will face the Emperor's wrath, that this violation will be avenged tenfold. These threats produce nothing but laughter from the greenskins. They've already beaten this supposedly mighty warrior. Why would they fear his friends? The day a Space Marine Dreadnought becomes genuinely frightening to Orks is the day the WAG has gotten very, very desperate. A few pilots fall into a kind of resigned meditation, drawing on centuries of experience and mental discipline to insulate themselves from the horror of their situation. They recite prayers to the Emperor, review memories of past glories, mentally compose reports of what they're observing, so that if somehow the information gets back to their chapter, future warriors might benefit from the knowledge. It's a thin shield against despair, but it's something. Eventually, whether through system failure, deliberate execution, or the cumulative effects of multiple injuries, these pilots die. Their final moments are rarely heroic or meaningful. They simply stop, their consciousness fading as life support fails, or their brain finally gives out, after sustaining damage the systems could no longer compensate for. There's no last words, no dramatic final act, just silence, and then nothing. The Orks, if they notice the pilot's death, react with indifference. They've gotten everything useful out of him by that point. The body becomes one more piece of biological salvage, interesting for about 5 minutes until something more exciting happens elsewhere in the camp. The skull might be kept, cleaned up and attached to someone's armor as proof of having downed a Space Marine. The rest will likely be discarded or fed to squigs. In death, as in captivity, the honored ancient receives no respect from his captors. All of this raises the question, how do chapters respond to the loss of a Dreadnought? The answer is with fury, grief, and an absolute determination to recover what was lost or avenge what cannot be recovered. When a chapter learns that one of their ancients has been captured by the enemy, particularly by Orks, they treat it as one of the gravest crises imaginable. Recovery operations are organized immediately if there's any chance of success. Combat doctrine is temporarily abandoned in favor of a single, overriding objective: get the Dreadnought back. Other missions are set aside. Strategic positions are left undermanned. Resources are diverted. Nothing matters more than recovering the Ancients' remains and denying the enemy their prize. The chapter will expend an almost irrational amount of resources on this effort, driven by a combination of practical and spiritual concerns. Practically, they need to prevent Ork mech boys from learning too much about Dreadnought technology. Each walker contains sophisticated systems that could provide valuable intelligence to an enemy who knows how to use that information. While Orks are crude engineers, they're not stupid, and they have an instinctive grasp of how things work. Given enough time to examine a Dreadnought, they might develop countermeasures, improved armor, or new weapons inspired by what they've learned. The Imperium cannot afford to give them that time. Spiritually, the loss of an Ancient is tantamount to losing a piece of the chapter's soul. These warriors have fought for centuries, their histories intertwined with the chapter itself. They've witnessed events now recorded in the chapter's chronicles, provided counsel to generations of leadership, and served as living connections to the founding days. To allow one to remain in enemy hands, to be desecrated and dishonored, is unthinkable. It violates every oath the chapter has sworn, every principle they claim to uphold. Recovery missions take several forms, depending on how long has passed since the capture. If the recovery can be attempted within hours or days of the initial loss, the focus is on speed and overwhelming force. A strike force of multiple squads, possibly backed by armor and air support, will assault the Ork position with one goal: smash through to the Dreadnought, secure it, and extract before the Orks can organize a coherent defense. These rapid response missions are brutal affairs, combining Space Marine precision with desperate urgency. The strike force doesn't bother with complex tactical planning. They identify the likely location of the Dreadnought, plot the most direct route, and punch through with maximum violence. Devastator squads lay down suppressing fire. Assault Marines drop directly onto Ork positions. Tactical Marines advance behind the barrage, clearing any resistance. The goal isn't to win the battle in any conventional sense, just to reach the objective and extract. If they succeed, the recovered Dreadnought is rushed back to Imperial lines as quickly as possible. Even if the walker is badly damaged, even if the pilot is already dead, the chapter wants it back. The machine will be repaired if possible, or respectfully decommissioned if not. The pilot will receive proper funeral rites, his name added to the rolls of the honored fallen. The chapter can then move forward with at least some measure of closure. But if days or weeks have passed, if the Orks have had time to properly dismantle the Dreadnought and scatter its components, recovery becomes far more complicated. Now the strike force must locate not a single walker, but dozens or hundreds of pieces spread across an entire Ork warband. Some parts might have already been modified or integrated into Ork vehicles. Others might have been traded to different mobs or other Ork settlements. A few critical components might have been destroyed entirely through careless handling or failed experimentation. In these cases, the mission shifts from recovery to denial. If the chapter can't reclaim their Ancient, they'll at least ensure the Orks don't benefit from his loss. The strike force targets mech workshops, vehicle pools, and anywhere else Dreadnought components might be stored or used. They destroy everything they find, burning workshops and scrap piles, demolishing any vehicles that show signs of incorporating Imperial technology. It's scorched earth warfare driven by righteous anger and desire for vengeance. The pilots who fly these missions, the Marines who fight in them, often describe a cold fury unlike anything they feel in normal combat. Fighting Orks is usually a straightforward affair. The enemy are numerous, brutal, and need to be destroyed efficiently. But fighting to recover or avenge a fallen Ancient carries emotional weight that transforms the engagement. These are their forebears, their mentors, warriors whose wisdom they've sought and whose example they've followed. To see them violated, reduced to salvage, turns disciplined warriors into avenging angels. This fury manifests in their combat doctrine. Standard rules of engagement are often discarded in favor of maximum aggression. They take unnecessary risks, push assaults that should be pulled back, refuse to disengage even when tactical wisdom suggests otherwise. Squad leaders have to actively manage their warriors' rage, reminding them that throwing their lives away in futile vengeance serves neither the Emperor nor the honored dead. Sometimes, though rarely, these recovery or vengeance missions uncover something that makes the entire effort worthwhile. They might find the Dreadnought's sarcophagus intact, allowing them to recover their brother's remains for proper interment. They might discover that Ork modifications to looted components contain exploitable weaknesses, intelligence that can be passed to other Imperial forces. They might even capture or kill the war boss responsible for the initial capture, dealing the whack a significant blow. More often, though, they find only scattered remnants and the confirmation of their worst fears. The Dreadnought has been stripped for parts, its sacred form reduced to components and scrap. The pilot is long dead, his remains missing or desecrated beyond recovery. The Orks have gained valuable technology and the confidence that comes from defeating something they fear. And the chapter must return to their fortress monastery, carrying the bitter knowledge that they failed one of their most honored brothers. The psychological impact on the chapter can be substantial, particularly if the lost ancient was especially venerated or the circumstances of capture were particularly ignoble. Chapters are normally psychologically resilient. Their warriors trained to accept death and loss as inevitable aspects of their duty. But losing a Dreadnought strikes at something deeper. It's not just the loss of a powerful warrior, but the violation of what that warrior represents. Every chapter member who ever sought counsel from that ancient, who trained under his observation, who drew inspiration from his presence, they all feel the loss personally. This can manifest in various ways. Some chapters become more cautious about deploying their Dreadnoughts, keeping them back in defensive roles, or only committing them when absolutely necessary. This approach sometimes draws criticism from the ancients themselves, who didn't survive centuries of war just to be kept in storage. Other chapters go the opposite direction, deploying their Dreadnoughts more aggressively, determined that their ancients will never suffer the indignity of capture, choosing death in glorious battle over the possibility of falling into enemy hands. Individual Marines might develop obsessive behaviors around the loss. A tech Marine might spend decades developing improved recovery protocols or defensive systems for Dreadnoughts. A chaplain might incorporate the story into his sermons as a cautionary tale about overconfidence or the importance of tactical awareness. A veteran sergeant who fought alongside the fallen ancient might request deployment to every anti-Ork campaign for years afterward, driven by a personal need for vengeance that borders on unhealthy. Chapter leadership must carefully manage this grief and anger. Allowed to fester, it can poison unit cohesion and tactical judgment. Properly channeled, it becomes a source of strength, motivation to ensure the tragedy never repeats. This is where the role of chaplains becomes critical, helping their battle brothers process the loss while maintaining the discipline essential to Space Marine operations. From a broader Imperial perspective, the capture of a Dreadnought by Orks is usually noted, but doesn't rise to the level of strategic concern. The Imperium faces countless threats across millions of worlds. The loss of a single walker, however sacred to its chapter, barely registers among the daily catastrophes that demand attention. Administratum officials file reports, update records, and move on to the next crisis. Inquisitors might take note if they're operating in the relevant sector, but unless there's broader implications, they're unlikely to intervene personally. The Adeptus Mechanicus takes a different view. To them, the loss of sophisticated technology to Xenos hands represents a failure of security protocols and a potential intelligence breach. Tech priests might dispatch their own recovery teams, though their motivations differ from the Space Marines. Where Marines seek to honor their dead and protect chapter heritage, Mechanicus adepts want to prevent technological contamination and recover valuable data. These parallel recovery operations can lead to cooperation or conflict, depending on the relationship between the chapter and local Mechanicus factions. For the Orks involved, the capture and looting of a Dreadnought represents a high point in their collective experience. The story will be told and retold across the warband, with each telling adding embellishments and exaggerations. The nobs who participated become legendary, their status in the hierarchy cemented by their role in the great victory. The mech boys involved gain prestige for their handling of the salvage and any useful innovations they developed from studying Imperial technology. This increased prestige has practical effects on the warband's effectiveness. The boost to morale makes the Orks fight harder in subsequent engagements, confident that if they could bring down a Dreadnought, they can handle anything else the Imperium throws at them. The technological improvements, crude though they may be, genuinely enhance Ork capabilities. Vehicles with better armor, weapons with improved reliability, defenses with stronger fortifications. These advantages can make a significant difference in future battles. There's also a psychological element to consider. Orks respect strength and accomplishment, and defeating a Dreadnought is both. Warriors from other warbands hear about the capture and want to join this successful mob. The WAG grows larger, attracting more greenskins who want to be part of something impressive. This snowball effect is one reason why early victories against Orks are so critical. Let them gain momentum and they become exponentially more dangerous. Interestingly, the captured Dreadnought often continues to influence events long after its destruction. Pieces of its armor might show up on Ork vehicles years later, passed down through generations of mech boys. The skull of its pilot might become a clan totem, carried into battle as a lucky charm. Stories about its capture become part of oral tradition, inspiring future generations of Orks to attempt similar feats. In a perverse way, the ancient continues to affect the battlefield, though now as an inspiration to the enemy rather than defender of the Imperium. Some captured Dreadnoughts achieve a kind of dark fame within Ork culture. If the warrior interred within was particularly renowned, if the circumstances of capture were especially dramatic, or if the subsequent looting produced particularly spectacular results, the story spreads beyond the immediate warband. Orks from different clans, different worlds, even different WAGs might hear about it through the complex network of trade, raiding, and occasional cooperation that connects Ork society. These famous captures become benchmarks against which other victories are measured. An Ork warboss looking to establish his credentials might boast about accomplishments framed in terms of these legendary events. I killed more Space Marines than Boss Grognik did when he took down the walking tin can. The captured Dreadnought becomes a cultural touchstone, a shared reference point in Ork oral history. From a narrative perspective, stories of captured Dreadnoughts serve as cautionary tales about the brutal reality of the 41st millennium. They're reminders that honor and tradition, however deeply held, provide no protection against a universe fundamentally hostile to such concepts. The Imperium presents Space Marines as ultimate warriors, Dreadnoughts as invincible engines of war. But the reality is messier, more tragic, more horrifying than the propaganda suggests. These stories also illuminate the fundamental incompatibility between Imperial and Ork values. To the Imperium, a Dreadnought represents duty, sacrifice, and the eternal nature of service to the Emperor. It's a sacred thing, worthy of reverence and protection. To the Orks, it's a challenge to be overcome and resources to be exploited. The machine means nothing beyond its immediate utility. The pilot is just another enemy warrior, notable only for being tough to kill. There's no moral dimension to the looting, no sense that they're doing anything wrong. They're just being Orks, doing what Orks do. This clash of worldviews extends to how each side processes the event. Space Marines see the capture as tragedy and desecration requiring vengeance. Orks see it as a particularly good day that should be celebrated with more fighting. Neither perspective is correct in any absolute sense. They're simply products of completely different species with completely different psychologies. The universe accommodates both, caring nothing for the suffering or joy either experiences. The long-term legacy of captured dreadnoughts extends beyond individual incidents. Every capture provides data points that both sides analyze and learn from. Imperial commanders study how it happened, identifying tactical errors or circumstances that enabled the capture. They develop new protocols, never let dreadnoughts become isolated, always maintain supporting units, pull back if encirclement becomes likely. These lessons are incorporated into training exercises and tactical doctrine, hopefully preventing future incidents. Ork warbosses, in their own crude way, also learn from these events. They discover that even the mightiest Imperial weapons can be brought down with sufficient numbers and determination. They experiment with tactics specifically designed to capture or disable dreadnoughts, rather than simply trying to destroy them. The most cunning bosses develop specialized attack formations, fast units to isolate the target, heavy units to disable mobility, and crowds of boys to physically overwhelm it. These tactics spread through the usual Ork methods of communication: fighting, boasting, and the occasional successful demonstration. The cumulative effect of multiple captures over decades or centuries subtly shifts the strategic balance. Orks become more confident in their ability to challenge Space Marine armor. Space Marines become more protective of their dreadnoughts, sometimes to the point of operational inflexibility. The arms race continues in its usual fashion, with neither side gaining permanent advantage, but both sides adapting and evolving based on hard-won experience. For chapters that have lost dreadnoughts to Ork capture, the event often becomes a defining moment in their history. It might be commemorated annually, with special services held to honor the fallen ancient. The circumstances of the loss might be taught to new recruits as a lesson about vigilance and the consequences of tactical errors. The battle brothers who survived the engagement often carry guilt for decades, wondering what they could have done differently, how they might have prevented the disaster. In some cases, chapters establish special units or protocols specifically dedicated to preventing or responding to dreadnought captures. A veteran squad might be designated as the Ancient's Guard, trained specifically in protecting and recovering dreadnoughts under extreme circumstances. These specialists study Ork tactics, practice rapid response scenarios, and maintain equipment specifically suited for recovery operations. They become the chapter's insurance policy against repeat occurrences. Other chapters take more aggressive approaches. They might launch punitive crusades against Ork populations in their sector, seeking to eliminate the threat before it can threaten their ancients. These campaigns can last for decades, with generation after generation of Space Marines hunting down greenskin populations with methodical determination. The goal isn't necessarily to eliminate all Orks, that would be impossible, but to cull their numbers to manageable levels and ensure no single warband becomes strong enough to threaten chapter assets. The psychological impact on the pilots who witness a fellow ancient's capture is profound and often overlooked. Dreadnoughts maintain communication with each other when deployed together, a brotherhood that transcends even death. When one of their number falls into enemy hands, the others feel it acutely. They know, perhaps better than anyone, what their fellow pilot is experiencing. They understand the helplessness, the violation, the slow degradation of everything they once were. This understanding can manifest as survivor's guilt, particularly if the captured dreadnought was older or more honored than his fellows. Ancient warriors who have survived for centuries might question why they still function while a brother has fallen. Some become more aggressive in combat, seemingly courting their own destruction rather than face the possibility of similar capture. Others withdraw mentally, their combat effectiveness declining as they struggle with depression and existential dread. Chapter chaplains and librarians work to address these issues, but there are limits to what even they can accomplish. A dreadnought pilot's psychology is fundamentally altered by their condition. They exist in a state that's neither fully alive nor truly dead, cut off from normal human experience. The usual tools for treating trauma and grief don't always apply. Sometimes the best anyone can do is ensure the ancient has opportunities to fight, to fulfill his purpose, to lose himself in the clarity of combat where such concerns temporarily fade away. From the perspective of the captured pilots themselves, those few who maintain consciousness through part of their ordeal, the experience often produces a unique and terrible understanding. They come face to face with the fundamental truth that the universe doesn't care about their honor, their sacrifice, or their centuries of service. The Orks don't see a venerated warrior worthy of respect. They see metal and weapons and interesting gubbins. The pilot's entire identity, everything that made him who he was, becomes irrelevant the moment capture occurs. This realization can be either liberating or devastating, sometimes both. Some pilots report, in those rare cases where they're recovered before death, a strange sense of peace in their final moments. If the universe truly doesn't care, if honor is merely a human construct without objective reality, then perhaps there's no shame in this ending. They served as best they could for as long as they could. That the ending was undignified changes nothing about the centuries of honorable service that preceded it. Others find the realization unbearable. Their entire existence post-interment has been justified by the belief that their sacrifice matters, that their continued service has meaning beyond simple utility. To discover that meaning is subjective, that it exists only within the narrow context of their chapter's beliefs, can shatter whatever psychological defenses sustained them through centuries of half-life. Some pilots effectively give up in these final moments, surrendering to death not because systems are failing, but because they've lost the will to continue. The broader question these incidents raise is whether the practice of interring mortally wounded Marines in dreadnoughts is truly merciful, or merely another form of exploitation. The Imperium presents it as an honor, the ultimate way for a warrior to continue serving the Emperor. But the pilot's subjective experience suggests something more ambiguous. They exist in perpetual isolation, their bodies destroyed, their sensory experience reduced to mechanical inputs, their periods of consciousness separated by decades or centuries of forced sleep. Is this really an honor worth pursuing? Or is it simply the Imperium's way of extracting every last bit of utility from its warriors? The question has no clean answer, and different chapters approach it differently. Some are quite willing to inter any Marine whose injuries would otherwise prove fatal, seeing it as obviously preferable to death. Others are more selective, only interring those who explicitly request it and demonstrate psychological resilience, likely to withstand the burden. A few chapters view the entire practice with deep ambivalence, treating it as a necessary evil rather than an honor to be sought. The pilots themselves have varying opinions, though few are ever asked directly. Some genuinely consider their extended service an honor and privilege. They've seen centuries of their chapter's history, witnessed events that have become legend, continued to serve and protect long after their mortal bodies failed. They wouldn't trade that for anything, even knowing the costs. Others view it as a burden accepted out of duty. They don't enjoy their existence, but they persevere because that's what they've always done, what Space Marines are trained to do from the moment they're selected as recruits. And then there are those who secretly wish for death, who pray for system failures or enemy action to finally grant them the rest they've been denied for so long. These warriors never speak their desires aloud, knowing it would shame them and distress their brothers. But in the privacy of their own thoughts, during long periods of stasis sleep or the quiet moments between battles, they dream of ending. Falling to Orks, being torn apart and scattered, represents merely one of many possible ways that dream might be realized. The cultural impact of Dreadnought captures extends beyond the immediate military concerns into broader Imperial society. On worlds where the capture occurred, the event might become part of local history, told and retold with varying degrees of accuracy. Some accounts treat it as heroic last stand, the ancient fighting to the end against impossible odds. Others are more honest about the ugliness of the event, the undignified nature of the ending. The truth varies by planet, by cultural tradition, and by how much imperial propaganda has shaped the narrative. For the common citizens of the Imperium, stories about dreadnoughts serve important psychological functions. These massive war machines represent the enduring nature of the Emperor's protection, the idea that heroes never truly die, but continue serving eternally. Learning that dreadnoughts can be captured, reduced to salvage by crude Xenos, undermines this comforting narrative. It introduces doubt about Imperial invincibility and raises uncomfortable questions about what happens when the Emperor's finest fail. Planetary governors and ecclesiastical officials usually respond to these doubts with increased propaganda, emphasizing other aspects of Imperial power. If citizens are worried about Space Marine vulnerabilities, redirect their attention to the billions of loyal guardsmen, the might of the Imperial Navy, the divine power of the Emperor's saints. The goal isn't to address the specific concern, but to ensure faith in the Imperium's ultimate victory remains unshaken. Among more educated or cynical Imperial citizens, the occasional dreadnought capture serves as a useful reality check. The Imperium's propaganda machine presents Space Marines as near-invincible demigods, dreadnoughts as unstoppable engines of war. Learning that both can be defeated, that even the mightiest warriors are merely mortal or barely beyond it, helps ground expectations in something approaching reality. This can actually be healthy, preventing the kind of complacency that leads to catastrophic strategic errors. Military commanders and strategists study captured dreadnought incidents for tactical lessons applicable beyond just protecting these specific units. The principles involved: maintaining unit cohesion, preventing isolation of valuable assets, rapid response to developing threats, recovery operations under hostile conditions, apply across many scenarios. Guard officers might review how Space Marines protected or failed to protect their dreadnoughts and adapt those lessons for their own armored units or heavy weapons teams. The Adeptus Mechanicus approaches these incidents from a different angle, seeing them as case studies in technology security and counterintelligence. Every captured dreadnought represents a potential intelligence breach, sophisticated Imperial technology falling into enemy hands. Tech priests analyze how the capture occurred, which systems were compromised, what technological secrets might have been exposed. This information shapes future designs, with engineers developing new protective measures or simplifying certain systems to make them less valuable if captured. There's also an element of technological archaeology to consider. When the Mechanicus does recover pieces of looted dreadnoughts, they're sometimes surprised by what they find. Ork modifications, crude though they are, occasionally stumble upon interesting approaches to problems. A mech boy might have inadvertently improved a system's durability by replacing a delicate component with crude Ork metalwork. These discoveries would horrify tech priests if examined too closely. The idea that Ork engineering could improve Imperial designs is near heretical. But pragmatic engineers quietly note what works and why, incorporating useful principles into future iterations. The long-term evolution of dreadnought technology is influenced, at least marginally, by these capture incidents. Each loss provides impetus for improvement. Armor gets thicker in vulnerable spots. Self-destruct systems become more robust and harder to disable. Emergency protocols are revised to better handle worst-case scenarios. The dreadnoughts of the 41st Millennium are more secure, more reliable, and more survivable than earlier patterns, in part because centuries of painful lessons taught the Mechanicus where vulnerabilities lay. Similarly, Ork technology evolves in response to successful captures. Mech boys who've examined dreadnoughts develop better understanding of how advanced armor works, leading to improvements in Ork defensive technology. They learn about power systems more efficient than typical Ork generators, inspiring crude but functional copies. They discover targeting principles that, even imperfectly implemented, make Ork weapons more accurate. This transfer of knowledge is haphazard and unreliable, but over centuries and across millions of Ork mechboys, it accumulates into genuine technological advancement. This creates an evolutionary arms race where each side's improvements force adaptation by the other. Imperial forces develop better dreadnoughts, prompting Orks to develop better methods for defeating them. Successful methods spread through Ork populations, forcing Imperial forces to develop countermeasures. The cycle continues indefinitely, with neither side gaining permanent advantage, but both sides becoming more sophisticated in their specific niches of warfare. For the Orks, the knowledge that dreadnoughts can be captured and looted becomes embedded in their collective consciousness. Young Orks hear stories from older warriors about taking down the walking metal monsters. They learn which weapons work best against heavy armor, how to exploit mobility differences, when to stand and fight, versus when to swarm from multiple angles. This oral tradition, passed down through violence and boasting, serves as Ork military doctrine in a culture that otherwise scorns such concepts. The most successful Ork tactics against dreadnoughts have been refined over countless engagements across the galaxy. Tank busters, Ork specialists in anti-armor warfare, specifically trained to target walkers like dreadnoughts. They know to aim for joints, to focus fire on already damaged sections, to keep moving to prevent the dreadnought from bringing its full firepower to bear. While individual tank busters might lack the discipline of Imperial soldiers, collective experience has taught them genuinely effective methods. The psychological dimension of Ork dreadnought combat is fascinating from an academic perspective. Orks should, theoretically, fear dreadnoughts. These walkers are bigger, stronger, and far more lethal than individual Orks. They represent exactly the kind of threat that should give even fearless warriors pause. But Orks don't really experience fear the way other species do. They experience excitement. A dreadnought isn't scary, it's a proper challenge, something worth fighting. This means that deploying dreadnoughts against Orks sometimes backfires from a psychological warfare standpoint. Where a chaos cultist might break and run at the sight of an ancient walker striding toward them, where Imperial Guard might waver before such overwhelming force, Orks get more enthusiastic. The bigger the threat, the better the fight, the more fun to be had. Dreadnoughts attract Orks rather than repelling them, which can lead to the isolation and eventual overwhelm that enables capture in the first place. Space Marine commanders learn to account for this dynamic when deploying their ancients against greenskin foes. Dreadnoughts need robust support, probably more support than they'd need against other enemy types. They need fast response units capable of breaking through when Orks start swarming. They need command structure prepared to fall back rather than reinforce if the situation becomes untenable. Most critically, they need leadership willing to accept the hard truth that sometimes the best way to protect a dreadnought is not to deploy it at all. This last point causes endless friction between ancient pilots and their chapter's leadership. Dreadnoughts don't want to be protected. They want to fight. That's their purpose, their reason for continued existence. Being kept in reserve because the enemy is particularly dangerous feels like an insult rather than sensible precaution. Ancient warriors who've survived for centuries don't appreciate being treated as fragile relics too precious to risk. This tension must be carefully managed to maintain morale and unit cohesion. The broader strategic picture reveals that Ork captures of dreadnoughts, while individually traumatic and tactically significant, rarely affect the overall course of wars. The Imperium's forces are vast, numbering in the billions across millions of worlds. The loss of a single walker, or even dozens of them over centuries, barely registers in the greater calculus of galactic warfare. Individual chapters feel the loss acutely, but the Imperium as a whole simply absorbs the setback and moves on. This creates an interesting disconnect between micro and macro perspectives. At the chapter level, a captured dreadnought is a catastrophe demanding immediate response and long-term reflection. At the sector level, it's a notable incident worth investigating. At the segmentum level, it's a data point in a much larger pattern of engagement with Xenos forces. At the level of the High Lords of Terror, it likely doesn't even rise to their attention, unless it's part of a much larger pattern of losses. This scaling issue affects how resources are allocated for recovery or vengeance operations. A chapter might dedicate enormous assets to recovering their ancient, seeing it as absolutely critical to their honor and identity. But if they request additional support from the broader Imperium, they're likely to be disappointed. Imperial authorities see one chapter's concerns as secondary to larger strategic priorities. Support will be provided if and when convenient, if at all. The chapter must largely handle the situation themselves, which reinforces their independence, but also their isolation. The political dimensions of Dreadnought captures occasionally become relevant when multiple Imperial factions have interests in the outcome. If an Adeptus Mechanicus tech priest believes the captured walker contains particularly valuable technology or unique patterns, they might pressure the chapter to allow Mechanicus participation in recovery operations. If an Inquisitor suspects the capture might lead to broader security breaches, they could claim authority over the situation. If Imperial Guard commanders need Space Marine support for other operations, they might resist allocating resources for what they see as the chapter's private concerns. These political tensions highlight the complex, often dysfunctional nature of Imperial authority structures. In theory, the Imperium speaks with one voice through the High Lords of Terror. In practice, countless factions pursue their own agendas with limited coordination and frequent conflict. A simple recovery operation can become a bureaucratic nightmare as different authorities claim jurisdiction and various interests compete for priority. The Space Marines, with their relative independence, often find themselves navigating these political waters while simultaneously trying to execute military operations. For the Orks, none of this matters in the slightest. They care nothing for Imperial politics, factional conflicts, or bureaucratic procedure. They have a prize, they're going to loot it, and anyone who tries to take it back is just providing more entertainment. The disconnect between Ork simplicity and Imperial complexity is almost comedic, if the situation weren't so tragic. In the end, what happens when Orks capture a dreadnought mid-battle is a microcosm of the 41st millennium itself, brutal, senseless, filled with suffering that serves no greater purpose than perpetuating more suffering. An honored warrior who has served for centuries and earned every accolade his chapter can bestow, ends his existence as spare parts scattered across an Ork warband. His sacrifice, his service, his very identity become irrelevant, reduced to metal and memories. The Imperium mourns, rages, and seeks vengeance, but ultimately accepts this as one more tragedy in an endless parade of tragedies. The Orks celebrate, loot, and move on to their next fight, having gained some useful technology and a great story. Both sides are changed by the event. Both learn lessons that will affect future engagements. But neither side achieves any lasting victory or resolution. They simply continue the eternal war, because in the grim darkness of the far future, that's all anyone can do. The captured dreadnought's legacy lives on in multiple ways. The technology salvaged from its frame will appear in Ork constructions for decades, bolted onto vehicles or integrated into weapons. The story of its capture will be told around Ork campfires, embellished and exaggerated until it becomes legend. The Space Marine chapter will carry the memory of its loss, using it as motivation and warning for future generations. And somewhere, in the chapter's halls of remembrance, a name will be carved alongside countless others, honored dead, who served until there was nothing left to serve with. This is the reality of war in Warhammer 40k. There are no clean endings, no satisfying resolutions. Just endless conflict grinding on across countless worlds, consuming lives and machines and hope with equal efficiency. The capture and looting of dreadnoughts is merely one small part of this larger horror. a particular kind of tragedy among infinite tragedies. It matters tremendously to those directly involved, and barely at all to the universe as a whole. And so the war continues. Dreadnoughts will march into battle, ancient warriors guiding their mechanical forms toward whatever enemies dare face the Emperor's wrath. Most will survive, their armor holding against impossible odds, their pilots' centuries of experience turning the tide of engagement after engagement. But some will fall, brought down by overwhelming force, or terrible luck, or simple attrition. And of those that fall, a handful will face the particular horror of capture by enemies who see only salvage where the Imperium sees sacrifice. For these fallen ancients, there will be no glorious last stand, no heroic death remembered in song and story. Just darkness and pain and the slow dismantling of everything they were. Their brothers will mourn them, will rage against their fate, will swear oaths of vengeance that might never be fulfilled. And then, eventually, they'll return to war, because that's what Space Marines do. The war doesn't stop for grief or anger or loss. It simply continues, grinding forward inexorably, consuming everything in its path. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the grimdark's darkest scenarios, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are countless more stories to tell from the 41st millennium, each one revealing another facet of this terrible, fascinating universe. What other scenarios would you like us to explore? What other questions about life in the far future keep you up at night? Let us know in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one, for the Emperor and for the honored dead who serve him still.